knows every shadow like a lover's name. Her steps a rhythm, a deadly game. Fingers chase the edge of time. She rewrites the world, one line at a time.
Chapter 4. Geneva Protocol. The conference hall in Geneva's Palais des Nations carried the sterile elegance of international diplomacy. Polished marble floors that echoed with carefully moderated footsteps, tall glass panels framing manicured lawns and the distant curve of Lake Geneva. Recessed lighting engineered to flatter faces on camera, without ever feeling warm. Flags of member states lined one wall, their colors muted under the neutral wash of illumination. Translation booths overlooked the main hall like glass-fronted observation posts. It was a theater built to project authority without intimacy, legitimacy without vulnerability. Ananya Rao moved through the crowd with the ease of someone accustomed to being overlooked. Her badge, laminated plastic, clipped to a discreet lanyard, identified her as Dr. Kavya Menon, cybersecurity specialist, Bharat Trade Consortium. The name was new, but the persona fit comfortably. Slightly academic, mid-level expert, important enough to be invited, but not important enough to be remembered. The credentials had arrived via encrypted courier 2 days after her last message to Volkov. A man with a diplomatic pouch and no discernible country of origin had left a package in a dead drop locker at a transit hub on the Austrian side of the border. Inside had been a passport, conference registration printouts, hotel details, and a USB token containing a fully fleshed-out digital identity. Kavya Menon, PhD from a mid-tier European university, a modest publication record in niche cybersecurity journals, consultancy work with several Indian textile exporters. The documentation would survive anything short of a deep background dissection by a major intelligence service, and even then, it would raise questions, not immediate alarms. Russian tradecraft at its finest, understated, thorough, and designed to sit just below the threshold that triggered real scrutiny. Now, standing beneath a chandelier that looked like a cluster of inverted crystal icicles, Ananya adjusted her badge slightly and surveyed the room. The Global Trade Compliance and Digital Resilience Summit had drawn its usual ecosystem. Delegations from national trade ministries mingled with representatives of export consortia, compliance officers from major multinationals, lawyers specializing in sanctions and arbitration, and an entire subculture of consultants whose true value lay less in their slide decks than in the contacts stored in their phone memories. Clusters formed around coffee stations and finger food tables. Small groups engaged in the ritualized dance of networking. Business cards changed hands. Email addresses were offered with the nonchalant generosity of people accustomed to filtering hundreds of messages a week. Ananya's eyes slid past them. She wasn't here for the visible actors. She was hunting for a different species entirely. The men and women who stood at the periphery of conversations, their posture relaxed, but their gaze sharp. The ones who listened more than they spoke. Who asked innocuous questions and remembered too much. Intelligence officers posing as ministry aides, corporate spies masquerading as risk analysts. Policy advisors who didn't bother to hide their curiosity because they were used to being underestimated. And somewhere in this carefully choreographed theater, Dr. Irina Volkov. The ID photograph she'd seen in restricted intelligence databases had shown a woman with pale hair and sharper eyes, always in functional clothing, always standing at a slight diagonal to the camera, as if refusing to be captured fully. The dossiers described her as early 40s, Russian, brilliant, uncompromising. The handful of anecdotes that circulated among cyber operatives painted a more textured picture. A woman who once spent 72 consecutive hours dismantling a NATO intrusion cluster, fueled only by black coffee and dark chocolate. Someone who could pivot from discussing quantum encryption to asking pointed questions about the political implications of satellite orbits. Ananya moved toward a side corridor, ostensibly checking the schedule displayed on a digital board. In reality, she positioned herself where she could see both the main entrance and the route to the smaller breakout rooms. A panel on emerging risks in supply chain digitization was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. It would draw many of the right people, those who dealt with the intersection of logistics, data, and power. Volkov had suggested that is the natural cover for their presence. Dr. Menon? The voice came from behind her, clean, lightly accented English, carrying the precise intonation she associated with Moscow's more educated circles. She turned. The woman standing there matched the images from her briefing files almost perfectly, though age and experience had added a few subtle lines around the mouth and a faint deepening at the corners of the eyes. Blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, pale blue irises that seemed to catalog her in a heartbeat. She wore a charcoal suit that was neither ostentatious nor cheap. The kind of off-the-rack tailoring chosen by someone who cared about function more than brand. A tablet rested in one hand, its case embossed with the understated logo of a Zurich-based risk analysis firm. Dr. Volkov, Ananya replied, keeping her voice low, her expression professionally neutral but faintly pleased. Your firm's work on supply chain vulnerabilities is quite impressive. The recognition phrase. Not exactly what she'd said, but close enough in meaning and structure to the line they had prearranged via encrypted note. Your recent paper on multi-node supply chain attack surfaces was illuminating. The specific wording mattered less than the cadence, the reference, the effort to sound like a genuine admirer referencing research. Volkov's expression didn't change drastically, but something in her posture shifted. A slight easing of the shoulders. A marginal tilt of the head that signaled acknowledgement. The tension of the initial approach loosened by a fraction. You are too kind, Dr. Menon, Volkov said. Her English carried the faintest hint of Russian consonants, smoothed by years of international forums. We merely describe what others build. Her gaze flicked once to Ananya's badge and back to her face, making it clear that she had already verified both. India's textile sector must be quite exposed to disruptions in customs pathways. I'm glad someone from your consortium is taking an interest. I find that vulnerabilities look remarkably similar, whether on a factory floor in Tirupur or on a customs server in Rotterdam, Ananya replied. Perhaps there's room for collaboration. The second half of the recognition sequence. Perhaps there is, Volkov said. The afternoon breakout on port digitization will be tiresome. Too many PowerPoints. My hotel has a business center. More private than this circus. We can talk there. Ananya nodded once, as if this were a simple extension of a conference acquaintance. Of course, I'm at the Beau Rivage. As am I, Volkov said. Convergence is such a pleasant thing, don't you think? They did not leave together. That would be sloppy. Instead, they drifted apart with the natural currents of the hall. Ananya made a point of attending the beginning of the supply chain panel, taking a seat near the back, nodding dutifully at the predictable observations about digital resilience and trusted partners. She took notes that meant nothing, drawing patterns in the margin that mapped possible relationships between names and faces. 15 minutes into the panel, as a European commissioner droned on about the importance of harmonized regulatory frameworks, she slipped out quietly, blending with a small stream of attendees heading for the washrooms or side meetings. The air outside the Palais felt colder, sharper. Geneva in early autumn had a way of making expensive suits and polished shoes look slightly inadequate against the reality of the breeze off the lake. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, dotted with clouds that seemed far too innocent for her purposes. She walked along the lakeside promenade, hands in her coat pockets, posture relaxed. Joggers passed, breath misting. A few tourists took photos of the jet Deo as it sent a column of water arcing into the air. Gravity and pressure locked in a momentary truce. The Beau Rivage stood a short walk away, a 19th century facade facing the lake, its interior renovated enough times to hide its age without erasing its history. It wasn't the flashiest of Geneva's hotels, but it was one of the most discreet. Heads of delegations stayed there when they wanted privacy, more than spectacle. Intelligence officers use its quiet corners for conversations that never appeared in official agendas. At the entrance, a doorman in a dark coat nodded as she entered. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and restrained luxury. Fresh flowers, coffee, a hint of something citrus in the air. Marble floors softened into thick carpets as she moved toward the elevators. On the third floor, she followed the signs to the business center, a suite of rooms set aside for meetings, the euphemism covering everything from real board sessions to compromise negotiations to discreet back-channel talks between people whose governments pretended not to speak. Room 3B's door was slightly ajar. Inside, she heard the faint hum of electronics and the white noise hiss of an active sound masker. She knocked once. "Come in," Volkov's voice said. Ananya stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The room was medium-sized, windowed, furnished with a conference table, a wall-mounted screen, and a sleek sideboard holding a coffee machine and bottles of water. Thick curtains hung on either side of the window, half drawn to soften the harshness of midday light bouncing off the lake. Volkov stood near the table, tablet in hand. On the far wall, a small device the size of a paperback book emitted a subtle, almost imperceptible hiss, the active noise generator she'd mentioned in her message. Another device near the ceiling blinked a slow blue pulse, likely a dedicated counter-surveillance sensor scanning for wireless anomalies. Once the door sealed, Volkov's professional facade softened by a few degrees, not into warmth exactly, but into something closer to unguarded human presence. "You're either extremely brave or extremely foolish, Agent Rao," she said in Russian-accented English, switching to her real name as if shedding an unnecessary layer. "Do you prefer Ananya, or shall I call you by your alias? You have so many." "Ananya is fine," she replied. Hearing her own name in this context felt strangely grounding. "And I'd prefer to think of myself as pragmatically desperate." Volkov's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Raw has you listed as a priority fugitive," she continued. "Your agency's internal bulletins are more leaky than they would like to admit. 3 different intelligence services have loaded your biometric signature into their European border screening queues. Then it's fortunate I didn't arrive via a line that uses standard border queues," Ananya said, walking to the table. Her tone remained light, but she didn't miss the underlying warning. She was on borrowed time here. "Ah, yes," Volkov said. "The Pakistani documentation. Bitter comedy. I appreciate the irony." "Seemed appropriate," Ananya said. "Besides, European systems are conditioned to look for certain patterns. An Indian business traveler is normal. A Pakistani consultant attending a niche compliance panel through an Austrian border crossing. That's background noise." Volkov gestured to a chair. "Sit. We'll move quickly. I don't enjoy being overheard, even when I'm reasonably sure we're not being overheard." Ananya sat, setting her satchel beside her chair, but keeping it close. Volkov took the seat opposite, placing her tablet on the table and tapping a command. A holographic display bloomed above the surface, semi-transparent light lines sketching a network architecture diagram in midair. Nodes flickered into existence, connected by pulsing lines that spanned continents in delicate arcs. "Let me show you what we've been tracking," Volkov said. Ananya watched as the diagram grew more complex. She recognized some of the geospatial clusters, data centers in North America, fiber junctions in Europe, undersea cable landing stations along the Indian Ocean rim. But many of the nodes hovered in the soft gray of unknown, annotated with provisional labels: Shell 01, Shell 09, SGX proxy, Meridian hub. At the center of the mesh, a cluster pulsed a deeper, more ominous red: leverage core. "The Mumbai incident," Volkov continued, "was phase 1, proof of concept and live calibration. They triggered limited payloads targeting your compliance networks to test their reach and their ability to rewrite causal narratives. You stopped some of it. That annoyed them." Her voice carried no gloating, only observation. "Phase 2, she said, zooming in on a lattice of lines connecting Europe, Southeast Asia, and India, targets the pharmaceutical supply chains. We've already seen dry runs, subtle delays in shipments of critical antibiotics, unexplained backlogs in customs for cancer drugs, odd discrepancies in inventory data at hospital networks in Tier 2 cities." Ananya's mind recalled specific headlines she had skimmed without full context over the past months. A regional hospital in Madhya Pradesh struggling with an unexplained shortage of a common chemotherapy agent. A news story about certain antibiotics being in tight supply in Kerala, blamed on port congestion. "And supplier issues. At scale," Volkov said. "Those issues become panic. Parents who can't find medicine for their children, chronic patients forced to ration doses, Social media amplifies every gap. Opposition parties blame the government. Western think tanks write op-eds about fragile governance and risky overdependence on sanctioned suppliers. Pressure builds. And eventually, Ananya said quietly, someone in Delhi compromises on something fundamental just to make it stop. Yes. Volkov did not soften the word. And phase 3, Ananya asked, though the shape of it already hung in her mind. Volkov zoomed out, then in again on a cluster labeled Ind Finance. Red nodes flashed. BSE Core, NPCI FX, Oil Pay GW1 to GW4. Direct assault on your financial nervous system, Volkov said. Bombay Stock Exchange core infrastructure, order matching engines, settlement queues, index feed generators. In parallel, petroleum payment gateways to your major refineries and oil PSUs. They don't need to break everything. They just need to introduce enough corruption and delay that nothing can be trusted for several hours. She tapped another point. Timelines appeared beside the nodes. 11 days, 7 hours, 19 minutes. They count down to a scheduled Russian crude tanker offloading at an Indian port. Timed, she continued, to coincide with your next crude shipment from Rosneft. If successful, it will appear to anyone watching from outside that India's financial and energy infrastructure is collapsing under the weight of unsustainable Russian dependency. The narrative writes itself. You picked the wrong side, and now you're paying the price. Ananya stood, unable to sit still. She moved to the window, looking out at the lake. White swans glided on the calm surface, unbothered by human politics. A tour boat cut a clean line across the water, scattering sunlight in its wake. Geneva's serenity felt obscene against the architecture of manipulation hanging in the air behind her. She spoke without turning. You said Mumbai was proof of concept. How far along are they in deploying phases 2 and 3? They've already seeded much of the infrastructure, Volkov replied. That's the part your people keep underestimating. Western cyber doctrine rarely relies on single-point strikes anymore. They prefer to create ecosystems, long-lived, self-sustaining. Malware families that burrow into systems as features. Contractor networks that blend legitimate optimization with covert sabotage. The hologram shifted again, focusing on a cluster in Central Europe. A label blinked. Meridian Global. This is the primary distribution vector, Volkov said. A Swiss logistics firm called Meridian Global. Officially, they provide secure freight management software and hardware for diplomatic missions and multinationals. Unofficially, their firmware update channels have been compromised. Every patch they push to their client networks is a potential leverage carrier. Firmware, Ananya repeated, turning back to the table. That's how they bypass traditional security models. Everyone checks app updates and visible software changes. Very few monitor what their hardware controllers are really doing. Exactly. Volkov zoomed in on a subgraph. Meridian's client list is a who's who of modern logistics and finance. 18 Indian port authorities use their cargo management modules. 47 pharmaceutical importers. 6 major banks have integrated their secure freight reconciliation tools into payment backends. The integration is deep. It touches customs APIs, warehouse inventory systems, and even some tax compliance dashboards. They've spent years building this, Ananya said. Her tone was flat, but inside, calculations raced. Mumbai was just the first crack of the whip. Yes, Volkov said. A warning shot, in a sense, to show that the infrastructure works, to calibrate responses. Something in Volkov's voice told Ananya that she found the Western operation not just dangerous, but aesthetically offensive. As a technician, she likely appreciated elegance and precision. As a strategist, she loathed being on the receiving end of someone else's multi-year plan. You said you could provide countermeasures, Ananya said, returning to her chair. Quantum encrypted tools, decryption routines. That's generous, and out of character for Moscow. If it's purely altruistic, Volkov shrugged one shoulder. We aren't altruistic. We are practical. Breaking operation leverage in India also blunts its potential deployments in other theaters. The same architecture can be repurposed against South Africa, Brazil, even parts of our own energy corridors. Better to poison the toolset now than fight it in 3 different places later. And in exchange, Ananya said, "You want my help with RAW's internal compromise, the mole." "Yes," Volkov said without pretense. "Someone inside your agency is feeding them exactly the data they need. Which networks to prioritize, which relationships to target, which assets to discredit. We have external visibility, network paths, contractor shell companies, timing. We lack internal confirmation. That is where you come in." Ananya exhaled slowly, fingers tapping once on the table. "I have a suspect," she said. "A senior analyst in the Cyber Countermeasures Division. He sits on the Oversight Committee for all major defensive deployments, which means he sees every configuration change, every new threat signature. He also has clearance to initiate emergency log rewrites during high-priority incidents." "A perfect position from which to frame you," Volkov said. "He can attribute your activity to unauthorized access, scrub his own involvement, and provide sanitized summaries to your leadership. His name is—" Ananya hesitated for a fraction of a second, aware of the quiet weight of what she was about to do. Arvind Saran, mid-40s, joined RAW from a private sector security firm that used to consult for several Western companies. On paper, he's loyal. In practice, he believes in being useful to the winning side. Volkov's blue eyes sharpened. She swiped across her tablet, calling up a dossier. A semi-transparent window appeared in a hologram with Saran's photo, CV. "Known associates. We have a partial file on him," she said. "Nothing conclusive. Some financial anomalies. Nothing large enough to trigger automatic alerts. A few off-record trips to Singapore under the guise of industry conferences. A pattern of contact with a consultancy in London that we know serves as a talent scout for Western agencies. He's careful," Ananya said. "Smart enough to keep any direct channel deniable. He probably sees himself as a broker, not a trader. Someone who keeps communications open in case things go badly for India's current trajectory. That particular psychotype is very common in your capital," Volkov said. "And in mine." Ananya nodded once. "I don't have hard proof yet, just patterns, correlations between when certain internal decisions were made and when external events occurred. But if operation leverage is as dependent on tailored targeting data as you imply, then someone with Saran's access is almost certainly involved." "Then we find proof," Volkov said. "Together." She reached over and tapped a new icon. A set of smaller diagrams spun up. Subnets marked rawxt, rawint, gateway node. They were fragmentary, clearly compiled from external observation, traffic patterns, metadata, glimpses of communication intervals. "We've been mapping RAW's external communications posture for years," Volkov admitted, without embarrassment. "It's what we do. We've seen a distinct change in behavior in the last 19 months. More data passing through certain VPN concentrators. Unusual handshakes with cloud providers that your agency never publicly acknowledged using. Shadow pipes," Ananya said. "Saran argued for more agile integration with private sector infrastructure. It gave our defensive tools better reach, but it also opened unmonitored paths." "Indeed," Volkov said. "We believe some of those pipes are being used to move targeting context to Western partners under the guise of joint threat research. He likely believes he is buying protection, or at least buying a seat at the table when decisions are made about how hard to hit India." "How do we turn that against him?" Ananya asked. "By poisoning the feed," Volkov said simply. "We introduce carefully crafted false patterns into the data he passes along. Enough to misdirect their operations, enough to make some parts of Operation Leverage backfire. At the same time, we trace the exfiltration path back to its true endpoints. Once we have that chain, you will have your proof." "You make it sound clean," Ananya said. "It won't be," Volkov replied. "There will be friction and risk for both of us." Silence settled for a moment, filled only by the faint hiss of the noise generator and the muted murmur of the city beyond the window. Volkov leaned back slightly, studying her. "You understand, of course," she said, "that by agreeing to this, you are stepping fully into a space where your own government will not hesitate to sacrifice you if it makes their problem simpler." "They already tried," Ananya said. "I'm just responding to the memo late." Volkov's lips quirked at that. Dry humor. "Good. You'll need it." She extended her hand. not with the stiff formality of a diplomatic greeting, but with the open, deliberate directness of someone offering a professional pact. The gesture carried more than surface meaning. It was an invitation to cross a line that in most training manuals was painted in thick black ink: cooperation with an adversary intelligence service at the operational level. Ananya looked at the outstretched hand for a heartbeat. Rao had trained her to see Russia as a complicated partner, sometimes ally, sometimes competitor, rarely completely trustworthy. But over the last few days, the neat categories of friend and foe had crumbled under the weight of actions. Her own service had turned her into a scapegoat for an operation it should have protected the country from. Moscow, for its own reasons, was offering her tools and context without demanding ideological fealty. In the end, the calculus came down to a simple question. Which course of action increased the probability that Operation Leverage would fail? She reached out and clasped Volkov's hand. "Welcome to the real alliance," she said. Volkov's grip was firm, callous slightly at the edges. A working hand, not merely a directing one. Outside, Geneva continued its performance of neutrality, pristine streets that had seen protests and secret police vans both. Elegant buildings that hosted peace talks and covert arms negotiations. Lakeside promenades where joggers and surveillance teams shared space without overt recognition. Inside this quiet business suite, something rare was taking shape. Not friendship, not trust in the conventional sense, but a collaboration built on shared recognition that some threats, those that targeted the invisible systems holding economies and societies together, transcended the comfort of old rivalries. Ananya released Volkov's hand and sat back. "What do you need from me first?" she asked. "Two things," Volkov said. "Your detailed reconstruction of the Mumbai incident, every keystroke you remember, every anomaly your tools slagged before the lobs were rewritten, and your best assessment of how quickly RAW will move to tighten international nets now that you've slipped the first one. They've already pushed my biometrics to European border systems, you said," Ananya replied. "They'll lean on friendly services to keep an eye out, but they'll be careful not to be too noisy. Publicly admitting that a senior cyber analyst has gone rogue reflects badly on them. So they will prefer quiet recapture," Volkov said. "No arrest warrants. No Interpol notices." "For now," Ananya said. "If they suspect I'm working with foreign services, that might change. We'll try not to make the cooperation too obvious," Volkov said dryly. Ananya began to talk. She walked Volkov through the Bandra-Kurla data vault, the initial anomaly in third-tier subnet traffic, the pattern recognition that had flagged the irregular packet bursts, the way the malware had disguised its true purpose under ransomware signatures. She described how she'd deployed her sinkhole, the countermeasures the code had thrown back, the specific moment she'd recognized Ghost Torch's architectural signature, only inverted, turned toward economic targets instead of communication nodes. She detailed the arrival of the internal arrest team, the timing, the language they'd used, the authority they'd claimed, the way the woman in the charcoal suit had referred to debrief quarantine with chilling ease. Volkov listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes or highlighting nodes on the network schematic. Once or twice she asked a pointed, technical question that made Ananya refine her description. Exact time intervals between certain alerts, the precise order of commands she'd executed when quarantining the flow. When she finished, Volkov sat back with a thoughtful expression. "They moved on you too quickly for it to have been a purely reactive decision," she said. "They were waiting for any excuse, perhaps even specifically for you to notice something." "I wondered that," Ananya admitted. "Saran has hated my presence in that division from the moment I joined. He tolerated me because my results were useful, but he always watched for deviations." He is indeed our mole," Volkov said. "Then he likely saw you as both asset and threat. Useful for identifying external vulnerabilities. Dangerous if you turned that scrutiny inward. Now he has what he wanted," Ananya said. "A pretext to discredit me, remove me from the board, and possibly harvest whatever work I left behind. But he doesn't know you're in Geneva with me," Volkov said. "Yet." "Let's keep it that way," Ananya replied. Volkov tapped her tablet again, closing the network diagram. In its place appeared a new interface, a list of tools labeled with codenames that meant nothing to anyone outside certain circles. "Here," she said, "these are our countermeasures against ghost torch-derived architectures, quantum encrypted decryption suites, pattern scramblers, and what I like to call mirror payloads. We can't neutralize their entire infrastructure. We don't have jurisdiction, and frankly, we don't have capacity. But we can create enough localized chaos and leverages execution channels to buy time and reveal their deeper structure." She slid a compact, unmarked device across the table, a small, matte black rectangle with a single recessed port. "This," she said, "is a key. Plug it into a secure machine with sufficient compute power, point it at the right segments of your network, and it will begin mapping and, where possible, corrupting leverages control logic. It is not foolproof. It will not magically solve your problem, but it will give you leverage of your own." Ananya picked up the device. It was heavier than it looked, the weight of condensed expertise and strategic risk. "Using this inside India will be tricky," she said, "especially since Ra is still hunting me." "You won't use it inside Ra," Volkov said. "You'll use it around Ra, through partners you still trust, through channels that Saran cannot easily monitor without exposing his own modifications. You'll need to be creative." "I usually am," Ananya said. Volkov stood, signaling that their first meeting was drawing to a close. "We will have to stage our next conversation as something more mundane," she said. "Perhaps a joint presentation proposal for the next summit. That way, if anyone notices we're spending time together, they'll have a plausible explanation." "And in the meantime?" Ananya asked. "In the meantime," Volkov said, "you'll need to disappear from Geneva in a way that doesn't light up every sensor your agency has." Ananya nodded slowly. "I've gotten some practice at that recently," she said. Volkov's eyes met hers over the table, blue against brown, two professionals from worlds that had always been instructed to see each other as problems. "Be careful, Ananya," she said. There was no warmth in her tone, but there was respect. "We need you alive more than we need you heroic." "I'll aim for both," Ananya said. Volkov allowed herself the barest hint of a real smile. "Ambitious," she said. "Very Indian." She opened the door, letting in a slice of muted hotel noise. For a moment, the sound of footsteps in the corridor and the gentle clink of cutlery from a nearby restaurant mingled with the low hiss of the noise generator before the latter clicked off. Ananya stepped out into the hallway. The carpet muffled her steps. A housekeeping cart rattled past, pushed by a woman in a neat uniform who paid her no attention. She walked toward the elevators, blending back into the anonymous flow of guests and conference attendees. Her hands slipped into her coat pocket, fingers brushing the cool surface of the black device Volkov had given her. Outside, Lake Geneva glittered in diffused sunlight, the jet day arcing water high into the air in an elegant display that tourists filmed on their phones. Swans glided, diplomats lunched, bankers calculated. Somewhere in a data center, thousands of kilometers away, scripts tied to Operation Leverage ran on schedule, unaware that two women in a quiet room had just agreed to disrupt their choreography. The hunt had entered a new phase, and for the first time since fleeing Mumbai, Ananya felt something like momentum on her side.
Her eyes burn cold, her touch ignites. She's the heartbeat in the dead of night.